This meeting of the Norwood City Council is hereby called to order. Please rise for the prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, as the body we congregate in these council chambers, we pray for thy divine guidance, that we may do all things well, according to thy holy will. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our new members. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall. Here. Mr. Clark. Here. Mr. Thompson. Here. Ms. Stevenson.
Present.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Here.
Mr. Sanker.
Here.
Mr. Breeden.
Here.
All members are present. We have 4 requests to amend the agenda. The first 2 are under administration reports. There's a letter from Keith Moore regarding the Law Department's annual report. That would be first, and the second is Mayor Williams doing his yearly mayor's report. The other 2 requests are under communications. So under communication, what would be communication number 2 would be a letter from Mayor Williams regarding mayor's court fines for December 2017. And number 3 would be a letter from Keith Moore regarding possible Cornerstone TIF bond refinancing. Those are the requests to amend the agenda. Is there a motion? Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I move that we amend the agenda as stated.
Seconded by Mr. Clark. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We'll move on to the minutes of the previous meeting. We have the December 26, 2017 meeting, as well as the January 1st, 2018 special meeting. I realize 2 or 3 of you were not at the December 26th meeting, but I think it's appropriate that you can vote on them and to approve them as if read. Mr. Clark?
Move to approve both sets of minutes as if read.
Seconded by Mrs. Hannerhan. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan. Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We do have a couple of requests to address council, but they are not on agenda items, so we will deal with those a little later on. We have no reports of standing committees, nor second reading of ordinances, or introductory reading of ordinances. We do have the introductory reading of resolutions, and the first is a resolution calling for a day of service in honor of Martin Luther King, Jr. Excuse me. Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. I would like to propose that we have all 3 readings of the resolution.
And would you like the first one to be in its entirety?
Yes, please.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Sanker. So the motion on the, is there any discussion on the motion to suspend the rules? So the motion on the floor is to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings, the first one in its entirety. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Please have all 3 readings.
Resolution calling for a day of service in honor of Martin Luther King, Jr. Whereas in 1994, Congress established the Martin Luther King, Jr. federal holiday as National Day of Service, a day on, not a day off, for communities to aspire and act in solidarity to further achieve the dream of equality. And whereas in the decades since Congress enacted that distinction, there have been marches, church services, community projects, essay contests, oratory debates, artistic expressions, and conversations to help individuals, families, and communities embrace their role in creating a just society. And whereas, in Norwood, Ohio, residents repeatedly demonstrate commitment to come together and support one another, creating trust and hope in the midst of personal and collective adversity. And whereas, in recognition of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., and in support of the countless Norwood citizens who give of their time and effort in the same spirit of improving the lives of others. And whereas in 2018, we can still make progress towards the dream of racial equality, social justice, and living wages for all, therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Norwood, State of Ohio, that Martin Luther King Jr. Day shall be a day of service locally, a day where families, neighbors, and friends use their time, talents, and treasure to support projects in the city that accomplish a vision of freedom and justice for all. Resolution calling for a day of service in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Resolution calling for a day of service in honor of Martin Luther King Jr.
Ms. Stevenson,
Thank you.
would you like to make a motion to pass the resolution?
I would like to make a motion to pass the resolution.
We're all learning as we go. It's okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Braden. Is there any discussion? Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you very much. I appreciate your guidance through this process. I'd first like to say I'm excited to be here and to be able to collaborate with other council members to put forth this resolution. For those who cannot see what we see, this was put together by Councilmember Braden and Councilmember Thompson and myself. And I'm very excited to acknowledge the history of volunteerism in Norwood and also connect to this national holiday that's been dear to my heart for many years. And so I want to let residents know that there's an opportunity to learn more about the holiday at MLK.gov. There are ideas for how to celebrate and project ideas. There's also a local Facebook page, MLK Norwood, where more information can be posted about ideas residents might want to collaborate on with their neighbors, their family, or friends.
Thank you, Ms. Stevenson. Is there any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to pass the resolution. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We'll now move on to administration reports, and the first is Keith Moore, giving the yearly law report. Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. We prepared a written and lengthy document that lists some of the things that we did. And to be honest with you, the first regular council meeting of the year kind of snuck up on me and the people in my office. And so we kind of put this together off the top of our heads. We don't have the numbers yet from the mayor's court to get the total number of cases for the year. And there's a number of things like that. I'm sure there's all kinds of things we've done that we've forgotten. You know, I asked that this report not be read in its entirety because it's long. We do a lot of things. We are the attorneys for the city of Norwood, so that's representing the city in criminal prosecutions and in enforcement of the building and health codes and the tax codes. That includes defending the city on lawsuits. It includes advising all of the departments of the city on, quite honestly, you would be surprised at the strange and weird things that come up. And municipal law as a rule, especially for statutory cities, is not clear in a lot of cases. So it becomes a best guess, what's the best way to work forward to get where we want to go? Because there's a lot of the time we're all in agreement and here's the result that we want to accomplish, what's the best way to get to it, especially when the legal answers are not cut and dry. I did want to mention two things in particular. First, please appoint a secretary to the clerk of council. The secretary in my office is now carrying 5 jobs and really should only have 4, and that would give him more time to work. We've had it. We didn't have a secretary at all for 5.5 months in 2017. So that is near and dear to my heart. Please move forward on that. The second thing is, one of the cases we're representing is the Virgil case, and that's one for the new members of council and just a reminder for the existing ones. Generally for suits like this, it's a civil rights case arising out of a prosecution, a murder conviction in Kentucky in the late 80s. Mr. Virgil was exonerated. The DNA was tested in the last couple of years, and none of it matched him. And so he was released. They tried to re-indict him, and that failed. And so this entire murder prosecution took place in Newport, Kentucky. Mr. Virgil has sued Newport and the city of Cincinnati and the city of Norwood. Through a weird quirk of fate, when we get, generally things like that, we're part of a joint insurance pool, and so we turn this over to our insurers, essentially. And so we have specialized counsel that represent us on things like this, and these kinds of cases are complex and difficult and involve a lot. And in this one, we got dragged in because one of our officers in the late 80s investigated a couple of things dealing with that. They just wanted to follow up in Norwood and met with officers from Newport and Cincinnati during the course of their investigation. There were some stabbing murders. There was one in Norwood, there were a few in Cincinnati, and there was this one in Kentucky. So the plaintiff's attorneys just tossed us in with it. And the reason I'm bringing this up tonight is today the judge in Kentucky issued an order. We filed a motion to dismiss. Oh, and just Tim and I, or Mr. Gary and I, are representing the city because through a quirk of fate in the late 80s, the city had no insurance. And that involved several hours of research digging through the old documents up in the crow's nest to find out who might have insured us then, and we don't, and why not. And so it's up to us, the two of us, and now our, hopefully soon, a little bit part-time secretary. And we filed a motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim. We just got the judgment, or a ruling from the court today. It's 42 pages long. I have not read the whole thing. Newport filed some stuff as well, and some of the individual officer defendants filed stuff. And the defendants, this is the first paragraph of page 41, and this is pretty much all I've read. The City of Norwood, Steve Daniels' motion to dismiss is granted as to count 2, count 3, count 5, count 6, count 9, count 10, and count 11, and denied as to count 1. So we did get 7 of the 8 counts kicked out. When I saw the notice that there was a judgment, I was very excited because they are now in the process of trying to get our grand jury transcripts released. And so that's going on in Kentucky, and so all the depositions have been pushed back, but there are 14 depositions that were scheduled and now have been kicked out. If we'd had this dismissed against us, we wouldn't have to do that. But those are now going to happen. And so we have a little more guidance on the specifics of the things we want to get to, but that's something that Mr. Gary is really going to have to deal with. They're in the process of scheduling those. So it's that kind of thing. It's those kinds of cases. There's just a lot of people involved. There are a lot of documents involved, and it's just one of those time-consuming things. But the good news is we're at 7/8 farther along on saying, come on, we're not responsible for any prosecution of this guy. Don't sue us. So that's the big news for today. And if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Do you have any news on the codification of the ordinances?
That is, Mr. Brown has provided some of the information to Walter Drain, and part of that is a process of taking, the codification is taking kind of what we had, is what the version that's online now from 2011, and Walter Drain folding in all the changes to those sections, the additions, subtractions, the change in language, into the existing sections from 2011, and that's 6 years worth of legislation to fold into and then get set up so it looks nice and will be searchable online and all that kind of thing. The other thing that they'll be doing is comparing our versions to changes in state law, and that's particularly for the traffic and criminal codes. There's the state's constantly changing things on that, on those kinds of things, and making sure all that's up to date. So some of that information has been turned over, and from our perspective, it's getting the text, like a Word version of the text, comparing it to what actually passed council, as opposed to what we drafted, because there are sometimes amendments from the floor and other things to make sure all of that is correct, and getting versions of that to Walter Drain for them to work on. And they have some of that, but not all of it.
Thank you. It's a big job with 6 years of legislation, I know. Thank you. Is there any other questions of Mr. Moore? Mr. Ponso?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. So, Mr. Moore, when Walter Drain is able to get all of these changes that the state made, but we haven't made yet, will that be kind of provided to council?
Mr. Moore?
Yeah, it's the final version of we will pass, and council will get an order that says we are codifying the ordinances of the city of Norwood. And when we do that, then that version, which will be, probably won't be attached, but it will be electronically. This is the version, and then that will become the official version of whatever those different sections are.
Okay.
Mr. Bonso?
Thank you. And then you said that Walter Drain was also looking up some of the traffic and criminal changes that were made at the state level, but we haven't kind of updated. When they are finished comparing that, will that be provided to council?
Mr. Moore?
That's an excellent question. I don't really know. Traditionally, council will pass a separate ordinance to update those. For the most part, the last round, the ones last year are there are things that are, it's really more a question of jurisdiction. Some of the, it's like the look back for the previous DUIs that take them out of mayor's court jurisdiction and take them, they have to go to municipal court. If it's a second DUI, you can't come through, you can't be prosecuted in mayor's court, and they changed the look back period. And there may have been a couple other changes, but there's really nothing like kind of substantive that affects, for the most part, what is going on. It's real, most of it tends to be administrative things.
Okay.
You know, the fees, here's the fee that you have to pay to the state. Out of every license plate violation, this much goes to the state. After every child seat violation, this much
Right.
goes to the state, and that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Next is Mayor Williams, your yearly report.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, what I'm passing around are the salaries for city people, bargaining units and so on and so forth. It might help you down the road to understand, you know, the salary structure and where the money goes. That's where most of it goes, is salaries. I'm going to do this a little different than I have in the past. In the past, I've written a report and I've spoke a little bit and then read it and then spoke on each item differently. This year I'm going to do it a little different. I'm going to cover different areas than I have in the past. This year begins my 15th year in office. Over the years we have submitted state and city reports. Reports resemble each other. This year I will attempt to alter the standard message as I have conveyed in the past. To begin, we are in a fiscal emergency, which itself drastically alters the way the city conducts its affairs. Now that to me is important because most people don't understand how it works. Most people don't understand how the budget works. Most people don't understand a lot about it. Matter of fact, we have a financial commission that Don and I sit on. 3 other people are financial backgrounds who live in the city. There has been some...
Or work in the city.
Or work in the city. That's right, Mr.
Here.
Shepherd.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times they have a hard time understanding municipal finance. They have a hard time understanding negotiations. They have a hard time understanding state law. So it's been a learning curve for them as well. According to the Ohio Revised Code, when a municipality is placed in fiscal emergency, a financial commission is put into place along with a financial supervisor from the state auditor's office. That would be April Davis and Anna Mary. They are here on a regular basis. We consult with them on a regular basis, and they spend a lot of time talking to Jim Stiff, the auditor. To summarize, the budget and most purchases are controlled by the Financial Planning Commission. While the process is clear to some residents and employees, others have difficulty totally grasping the change. Misunderstandings arise when all the facts are not known. A few examples would be the purchase of equipment, whether it be paramedic unit, trucks, etc., public works, police cruiser, all have to be approved by the Planning Commission. And some don't understand that it has to be part of the plan. Once it's part of the plan and the council adopts it, it has to go to that Planning Commission for approval. They don't get involved in negotiations, but all the purchase of the plans do, because in the past, cities have come out of fiscal emergency, namely us. As soon as they were out of it, they popped everything, they spent everything, and they were right back into it. This is sometimes promoted the idea that the administration and council will not spend money for equipment. There again, the council cannot do it unless it's part of the plan and the commission approves it. So you will find out down the road that you will get blamed by some when in fact you have a partial responsibility. You still have a responsibility to pass it, but it has to be part of the plans and they have to improve it. That's important. You have to remember that, because you're going to get blamed whether you're guilty or not. We have had some employees leave the city and work other places. Most of all were members of the police department. I have been told many reasons for their departure. Some said pay was an issue, while others stated equipment and so on. To be honest, I can't envision the city of Norwood being able to pay on the same levels as Blue Ash, Madeira, etc. I've included to you all the salaries that are paid by the city. Now, it wouldn't be fair. Norwood is 3 square miles. we cannot keep doing the same things we've done in the past and expect to survive. Keith's been around, Joe Sanger's been around, and it's been said time and time again, our money is going out faster than what it's coming in. I think we've probably in the last few years, many years, brought in about 4,000 people and about $550 million worth of development, and we're still behind. So we have to look at how we do, how we pay, and how the money goes out. It's not fair to expect us to compete with Blue Ash or Madeira or Indian Hill. And I mean no disrespect for them. It's a lot safer working in Madeira or Blue Ash than it is Norwood, and they pay more. So it's just one of those deals where, you know, we just can't do it. And with that said, one of the things that we've told the Planning Commission and other people and the public is we can negotiate with the bargaining units, and we may or may not come to an agreement. But it goes to fact-finding. And then fact finder could find in our favor or in favor of the bargaining unit. And if it goes to arbitration, the arbitrator could say, city, pay. And don't make a difference whether you've got it or not, you pay. Or they may say, you'll take part of it, you give them this, we'll give you this. So it divides it up. In the past, we have taken a position, Kelly Babcock is with Clemens Nelson's. So we hire one of the best law firms in the world, or in the state, to defend us in negotiations. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it don't. Sometimes there's cooperation, other times there's not. So it's just one of those deals that goes on and on and on. So like I said, we cannot keep up with Indian Hill and those places. We just can't do it. We just don't have the resources. With the election of new council, I will recommend that the council of the whole regularly schedule meetings to bring department head to answer council's questions. They could start off with the administration, and I can assure you we will answer all your questions. Could be followed up by the chief and assistant chief of the fire department, the chief and the captain of the police department. Both from each department would be required to attend. The building commissioner and maybe Inspector Mark Reeves to attend and answer council's questions. The departments can be followed up by other departments, including 911 separately. I believe by taking this course it will accomplish two goals. It will assist council to straightforward questions in order to make informed decisions. It will inform the public to the facts regarding the operation of the city, thus reducing the spread of information. So you bring these individuals in, you ask them questions. Ask me questions, ask Joe questions. Come straight at us. Insist on answers. Ask them. That way you're informed. That way the public is informed. And that way we won't see all this, I don't even want to give it credit, but on some of these areas where they put out information, it's just not true. It's just not true. So it's your way of communicating with the public and having people who work for the city and are responsible for running this department to communicate with you. So we're all above on board. We're all on the same page. And if you go in and ask softball questions, don't ask me softball questions. You want to know something, ask me, I'll tell you. It may not be the answer you want to hear, but I will tell you. That's the only way we're going to get ahead. It's the only way for you new council members to get caught up. This is a nice tranquil place in here tonight. It can turn into an ugly mess some nights. There's people back there that want to throw you out that second floor window some nights. You'll experience it. You've experienced it. Joe, you've been there so many times. Huh? So for you that have not been there, it'll happen. And that's, it's frustration on people's part. But part of the problem is people will react when they don't have the information. So bring department's head and give them the information. My final thought is to address the financial future. At one time, the city had a financial reserve just over $3 million. Believing the good times would always be around and that the reserve fund would never be depleted. Shortly after that, the economy crashed and the rest is history. So with that in mind, I will propose the following course of action. We know Paycor is going to do groundbreaking on a new facility up there at their present site. Somewhere between $57 and $60 million, with about 1,100 new people. And at the same time, there'll be another 100,000 square foot office building go down at the Zumbiel site on Harris Avenue. That, of course, will take less time. But these are two massive developments. Here's what I propose. Keith, I kind of jumped on this, so if you want to legally. Here's what I propose. I propose that any funds that come from those two locations, whether it be building permit, earnings tax, or what, be locked into a separate fund. And it can't be touched. It'll take a majority of council to touch that money. And those funds stay locked up until we reach the goal of $4 million. Once we reach that goal of $4 million, then it can return to the general fund. Because in the past, this city has had a strong history of spending money even before it comes in. So if people see that, it happened really with Linden Point. They spent the money, it was gone, and it never got developed the way it should. So those are my thoughts. Now, the final point of this is, if we take this action and we keep it up and we build that reserve fund up, then eventually there's going to have to be something done with the streets. And when I hear people say, or some indicate, that these streets can be repaired out of the general fund, that's not true. If you can figure out a way to get $30 million out of the general fund to fix streets, let me know. But that will never happen. You will never get it out of that general fund because we will never generate enough money. What I do propose is if you pass that legislation and you begin the process of putting money away, then I believe the city's earned the right and the trust to go to the public and say, we need a street levy. Because now you've justified it. Now you've taken prudent financial acts to cut your spending down and put money away. Because I'm telling you, when people say, well, we'll just take it out of general fund. Well, let me know when you start taking money out of the general fund. Would you let me know when you do have the funds in there to take out for the streets? Because I can't see it happening. Joe Sanker and I have talked about it for years. Keith Moore and I have talked about it for years. We can't keep on the same course. We just can't. Joe will tell you and Keith will tell you, how many times have I heard him say, we just can't, you can't keep this up. We can't. We've got to reduce our operating costs. And the trick is to reduce the operating cost and yet maintain that level of service. We all want the good service, and we want it at our fingertips. But we've got to figure out a way to pay for it, or how to reduce the cost. And in that area that we have told you in the past, since you were on council and last year, that we were going to look at 911 and everything else. We have begun that process. We tried looking at the retirees' health insurance, and that got derailed. It will be back on the rails. It's not going to go away. So you will be looking at probably later this year sometime. That will have to be revisited. We are in the process of having discussions with the Hamilton County over the 911 system. We will again address that and bring it to the Financial Commission and to you. So briefly, I know I've rambled on, but I've had these thoughts running around in my mind, like what they say, like a BB in a boxcar. And we've had to talk about it. We have to bring it out into the open. We can no longer sit around and have these committee meetings and then get outside here and talk about all the solutions. It's got to be done in here. And it's going to be up to you. It's your responsibility as a legislator, and I will assist you as the mayor in any way I can. If you, like I said, if you want to have that commission meeting and have me up here before or after you have those department heads up there, do it. I'll tell you. Now, technically, roads and streets and everything, I'm a guesser on that. I have no clue. But on the general operation and how I see the city progressing on, moving on to correct our problems, I'll give you my opinion. But I can tell you this, if we think that we continue on doing the same way that we're doing now, we're going to still be in this fiscal emergency 5 years from now. If we take the corrective action and make the proper adjustments, we can be out of it in 2.5 to 3 years. You don't want to rush getting out of it, but we have to do certain things on our own in order for us to go to the public and ask them for anything. Sorry for the rambling. If you got any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. And I'm always, most of the time, I'm available in my office. You can call me, you can come in, and I'll do my best to answer your questions.
Does anyone have questions of the mayor? Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. Appreciate your thoughts. I do have a couple of questions that I'm hopeful you can address tonight. Is the idea to build up the reserve part of the current recommendation from the Financial Planning Commission?
Not that I'm aware of. We got to try to figure out how to pay the bills first.
Okay. And then you mentioned $4 million as the goal for building up the reserve. Is that what it typically was in the past, or where does that come from?
I'll give you a quick story. We had a little over $3.5 million, so we were somewhere in there. And there was this little page that people used to put their feelings on, type out stuff and send messages. And one individual put on there, "Oh, don't let anybody fool you. There's plenty of money in the city. We've got plenty of money." And it was an elected official. Okay. They put it out and they spent it. In 2008, the bottom dropped, and there was no reserve to fall back on. That's the whole idea.
Okay, thank you. I have
Plus
one
the
more.
trust of the people.
I see what you mean. My last question is, how was the reserve built before? Was it also the strategy you mentioned of holding back revenue from particular building projects or businesses?
A lot of it came from when they refinanced the Cornerstone TIF over there, and they refinanced it so that the developer got some funds back and we got some funds. And sure enough, that money was coming in, and everybody said, "Well, we're going to do it for this, they're going to do it for that," and I said, "I'll veto it," and it irritated some people until you can lock it up where it takes a majority of council. And once you build that funds up, it's hard to get a majority of council, because once they build it up, they don't want to get rid of it. So they built the fund up, and so then the bottom dropped out, so they had to use the money, to pay for electric. They was going to turn our electric off. They was going to turn the lights off. They couldn't turn the street lights off, but they was going to turn the lights off at City Hall, and they was going to cut our electric off. And I debated, fought with them, trying to get them to find another way to do it. And we finally agreed. And council agreed at that time to release some of those funds. But if it hadn't been for that fund, there wouldn't have been any electric in this building. Because the finance committee was trying to deal with absolutely no funds, and they had to work through that to get us through it.
Mayor, I'd also like, just as if you wouldn't mind, I know that you floated this idea in front of the Financial Planning and Supervision Commission in the past, and I know they said that that money from PAYCOR was going to be needed to get us out of fiscal emergency. Whether or not council passes, I will take that idea, as you can, to the Financial Planning and Supervision Commission to see if we pass that kind of a resolution or some kind of legislation, whether that would change their opinion. But as I recall, I can look back at the minutes, there was some discussion about, it's a great idea, but we have to have all the money that comes in the general fund to get out of fiscal emergency.
And I will
we'll
explain
take
to
that
them,
back.
like I told them, you'll have people come to this council meeting and say, "Well, if you don't do that, the world's going to end. We're all going to die. You've got to have that money or it'll be your fault." No, figure out another way. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I believe in this strongly, and I'll disagree with the Financial Commission. And if I can argue for saving money, I'll take that position every day of the week. Because as long as I've been here, I'm sick and tired of seeing the city spend its way in oblivion. And we do it all the time. And I said, We. That means all of us. Bargaining units, departments, council members, we all do it. We all spend every dime we can get our fingers on. And that's for two reasons. They want to satisfy the public, or they get scared. And if an arbitrator says we have to do it, then we don't have a choice. But until that arbitrator says it, my goal is resist it with everything we've got. When somebody comes in and says, I want this, the automatic answer should be no. Figure out another way. And then we'll go from there. Joe Sanker spent enough time on Finance Commission, he's had to say no so many times that, and then got blamed for it. It wasn't his fault. But sometimes you just have to say no, or we're going to do everything we can to resist it. Because I'm telling you, I've been around here a long time, and every time the money comes in, somebody's going to want it. Whether it's a citizen or employee or what. Somebody's going to want it. One dime extra and they want it. We've had bargaining units tell us that. Now it's time to pay us. So read the salary things, and if you've got any questions, and we'll see what we can do with the Finance Commission. But I have no guilt whatsoever being on the side of saving money. I have no problem with that at all. My wife raised me that way. Anything else?
Any other questions of the mayor?
That just,
Mr. Sanker?
not actually a question, but a comment based on the potential of looking into a reserve fund. We talk about the 5-year plan that was submitted. Actually, the amount of revenue that potentially could be raised by the two projects in question, that really wasn't included in the increased dollar amounts. The increased dollar amounts of revenue every year in general fund that we included was minimal, to say the least, because we didn't want to be over aggressive to get out of this plan. So if we can meet this assumption, if we can meet our revenue generation that we provided for them, and then have additional funds to put aside for a reserve, I think that would work pretty well, because another part of the plan was that we were supposed to have plans for the future for infrastructure and be able to maintain some of the requirements as city we've kind of neglected because we haven't had the funds. So I think if you would approach it that way, that, hey, if we meet our budgetary numbers for the plan and can put this away, this is being put away as part of our requirement to look towards the future, to have money set aside so we're not chasing our tail again down the road. So maybe I will approach them with that aspect.
Right, and you're speaking from experience, Mr. Sanger, because as you know as well as anybody, and Keith knows, is when Linden Point was going up there, they had that money and they spent it. They obligated it. That money's coming in and we're going to do this. We've issued bonds and we're going to do streets and everybody's going to be happy and everything. Then it didn't go through as well as they thought it would. And we were stuck with those payments. And if we're not careful, same pressure will happen again. I have 2 years, may run again, we don't know. But I have 2 years and I'm not going to move from the city. And I don't want it, broken down and hear the complaints and not being able to get the service. When I become a resident and not an employee, I want to feel safe, and I want my city to be financially secure. And so I have no guilt whatsoever pressing to save money. You can't go wrong pressing to save money. And everybody that wants you to save money, they'll say it's a good idea until you don't want to give them what they want. And then it's not a good idea. And you'll see it happen. They'll say it's a good idea, save money, and then they'll say to you, Mr. Breeden, but I want this. And when you say, no, we're going to save money, see how happy they are.
You say 4 million, I say 5.
Whatever, that's fine. Fine. I mean, we can't emphasize this. If we're going to go to ask people, you're going to need to go to ask people for money for the streets. It's not going to come out of the general fund. I don't care what anybody says. You better show them you're responsible, or they're going to tell you no. They did before, and they'll do it again. And I don't blame them. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll move on to other requests to address council, and the first is Bill Kramer. If you will give us your name and address, and you'll have 5 minutes to address council.
William Kramer, 6227 Cavalcade Drive, 45011. Is that good?
Yep, you're good, thanks.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Madam President, council members. Happy New Year. I want to take a few minutes just to address a couple issues. Back in October, I filed a lawsuit naming the mayor and the safety director. Before I say another word, I would like to say that this lawsuit was a professional matter, and by no means anything personal. I have nothing personal against the mayor. In fact, I hold him and his entire family in the highest regard. While I don't know Mr. Gears as well as I know the mayor, again, this was not a personal matter, it was strictly a professional matter. With that being said, there's no way to do something like this and not have it affect personal relationships. For the most part in my 6 years, the mayor and I have worked well together. Unfortunately, over the last year, that relationship has somewhat deteriorated. I filed the lawsuit because I felt that my statutory rights as chief of police were somewhat being infringed. I felt I had taken steps to communicate and try to work things out, but that was not successful. At the time I filed the lawsuit, I felt it was the right thing to do, and I still feel it was the right thing to do at the time. There's two sides to every story, and usually somewhere in the middle lies the truth. In this case, I feel I was on the side of right. I also want it to be understood that by filing this lawsuit, in no way, no shape or no form, or any form, was I saying that I do not believe the mayor or the safety director should have a say in the operations of the police department. To the contrary, they are integral to every department in the city. Last week, I informed my attorney that I wish to discontinue the lawsuit. There are various reasons for this, some personal that I won't get into, but there are others that I would like to quickly explain. Upon returning to work after filing the lawsuit, I had people come up to me and say things such as, you know, we are on Team Kramer, or so-and-so is on the side of the mayor. I appreciate support and appreciate the officers that supported me, but we shouldn't be having teams right now. We need to be working together as a department and also as a city. We should all be on one team, trying to make us the best we can. Right now we're in the process of giving a test to hire more police officers, and I'm quite aware of the message it sends when the chief of police is suing his bosses. It says that we have a department in chaos, and that isn't conducive to hiring police officers, particularly in an environment that overall is not conducive to hiring police officers right now. In 2017, we lost 10 officers to other agencies. We have lost too many good officers, and we are getting ready to lose a couple more. And there are others that are also looking for outside employment, and we can't replace that experience. Most of these guys are experienced officers that have been here for a while. We are fortunate that we still have outstanding officers and supervisors. I think if you were to do a search of local media outlets for positive stories about areas police officers, I believe that you would find that we have more than most. This is not a reflection of me. This is simply a reflection of the quality of dedicated and committed officers that we have on this police department. I have met with almost every officer who has left this department, and the mayor kind of hit on it in his year-end address, and I've heard relatively the same thing from each and every one, and that is a lack of faith in the city will turn things around. They feel that they are dealing with inferior equipment and facilities, and they recognize some of the strife that exists between the police department and City Hall, and they're correct. We have to do better, or we're going to continue to lose officers. I can only report what I am told, and I encourage each of you to talk to those who have left or those who are looking to leave. And if you hear something that's different than what I'm hearing, I'm certainly willing to change the way I conduct business. I'm more than willing to listen as long as it doesn't compromise our core values as a police department. I would hope that anyone who has dealt with me would realize that I am reasonable and always willing to listen. I grew up in Norwood. Norwood is my hometown. I had one goal when I graduated Police Academy in 1991, and that goal was to be a Norwood police officer. I attained that goal in 1996, and since I've been here, I've never looked to work anywhere else. This is the only place I wanted to be. I care deeply about this city, the police department, and every one of the police officers we employ, as I know each of you do. I did not plan to be entering my 7th year of being a police chief to be standing in front of City Council explaining why I was dropping my lawsuit against the city that employs me. I cannot and I will not absolve my responsibility of fixing what is obviously broke. For the last 2 years, it feels that I've been trying to bail out the Titanic with the Dixie Cup. And I imagine that for some of you here that have been on council for a while, you've had that feeling also dealing with some of the city's financial problems. I'm not ready to throw in the towel, but I have to be honest that I ran out of good answers. I know this much though, and that's that communication and dialogue is key. A willingness to work together is imperative. It is for these reasons that I've outlined here that I am discontinuing my lawsuit. My plan is to continue to do my job to the best of my ability by doing what I think is right, and I'll let the chips fall where they may. With the losses over the last year, this police department is in a crisis mode. We are keeping our heads above water, but barely. We have to first stabilize, and then we'll have to rebuild, and it's going to take a while. I ask that each of you, the mayor, the safety director, that you work with me. My door is always open, and I'm more than willing to not only listen, but actually hear what anyone has to say. I want to thank you each for your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Kramer. Next is Pastor Sonny James.
Pastor Sonny James, 1830 Hopkins Avenue, the wonderful city, Norwood, Ohio. I want to first say Happy New Year. I want to say Happy New Year to all of the residents of Norwood and to council, president of council, the mayor, and to all of the families that have patiently prayed and patiently waited for newness in our wonderful community. I am one of those. I'm excited about today because it represents change. It represents the beginning of endless possibilities. And I, for one, am excited about joining the bandwagon to do whatever is possible to continue that positive push in such an awesome community. People oftentimes ask me, what is it that you like about Norwood? And I say, you know, much like myself, when you can take something that's not perfect, when you can take someone who's not perfect, when you can take something that's full of flaws, and then an energy can come about from internal and collectively work together to bring about a change in mindset, that excites me. And so I'm very excited about our community because that is exactly who we are. We are a community that's had a lot of adverse situations, a lot of challenges within relationships, but I'm excited because I can honestly stand before the people of Norwood and say that I'm very hopeful that change is on the horizon. Dr. Martin Luther King lived and eventually went on and passed away, but before he did so, he was very bold to not be focused on just passing resolutions, which are just mere pieces of paper, but to actually be a part of the change of the mindset of those in leadership. A couple of years ago, I presented a 13-point plan. It was never embraced. I want to encourage the current council members to try to look at those things and not just take the ideas and do them on your own, because quite frankly, as you can see how our city is, it is the way it is because unknowledgeable individuals that have not had the understanding or the training try to then take a great concept and push it out themselves. In 2018, we have great residents with great skill set. If there's residents that can help us, please let us embrace them. Let us embrace them and welcome them in. Because as the mayor said, and I'm closing, we've got to stop doing things the same way. But unfortunately, we have continued to do things very much the same way, and not just doing them, it's the mindset that we have in doing what it is we do. So my encouragement as I take my seat is in 2018, a lot of the stuff we've done is because we didn't know what we were doing. Let's include the residents more. Let's include the nonprofits that are actually on the ground hitting and running. And then council members, those of you, if there are any here, that are, career political seekers, that's fine. But don't just take the ideas for your political gain. Work with the people that have done it, that know what they're doing. And don't look at them based on who they are or what you think about them. Give them an opportunity to come in. And that's one of the things that I'm going to really be trying to challenge us on, is getting a resident support committee that just takes a look at things and helps us to be aware. So when you come into the chambers, you're not always coming in a few minutes reading something and then it's major and you're having to vote on it. And then you don't even know what to do. As we faced at the end of the year with the C9 Trust. So God bless you. Happy New Year. And I'm on board. I really want to work with our city in any capacity. And just God bless you. And let's keep praying for each other. Have a wonderful year.
Thank you, Pastor James. We'll move on now to unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business? Mrs. Hanrahan.
Hi, I would like to comment on Chief Kramer. I didn't get to do that after he spoke. I'm sorry he's not here. I want to thank him for coming and speaking to us. I think that would have been a very difficult task for him to do, to ask that, that people can work together. I understand his frustrations of not being able to work together. We've all seen it. We've all been part of it, even on council. Everybody's been in the middle of it, and I really hope that the administration, police, fire, all our departments and us can learn to trust each other, try to be trusted, be honest, and I think we all want to do the same thing, and that's what's best for Norwood, and that should be our goal. So it's all I needed to say, and say thank you to him for coming and speaking to us so frankly.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanrahan. Any other unfinished business? Seeing none, is there any new business? Mr. Sanker.
Madam President, I would like to put the matter of the C9 Trust and the Retirees Healthcare, I'd like to put that back into the Committee of a Whole for discussion. I know we were working on that at the end of last year. Actually, we were working on it all of last year. So I would like to put that back in the committee. If at some point in time the Committee of a Whole feels to report it out, to put it into possibly finance or something of that nature, we can do that. But I think we finished with it in Committee of a Whole. We could start with it to bring everybody up to speed as a group and then move forward. So.
For those, thank you, Mr. Sanker. For those new to council, anything that was previously in committees died at the end of the year, so anything has to be reintroduced into committee. Last year, at that last Committee of the Whole meeting, I made a commitment that I took responsibility that I would try to find answers to some of those questions that you all raised in the Committee of the Whole meeting, and if that's okay with you, I will still continue to do that. And when I have something concrete, then I will call a Committee of the Whole meeting, if that's okay with all of you. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sanker, for doing that. Is there any other new business? Ms. Stevenson, I'm sorry.
Thank you. This is actually a follow-up question to what you just shared. Thank you for carrying on that research. Do you have an anticipated timeline for when you might have updates?
We were originally discussing that perhaps we could have a Committee of the Whole meeting in February or first part of March, and so that we could spend the rest of the year taking like having one reading at each of the meetings and getting feedback from people to make sure that we had time so that the folks who are part of the C9 Trust would not be panicked and not know, about what they weren't aware of or what they didn't know. And so that everything would be into place so that we wouldn't be rushing at the end of this year to get everything in place for the January 1st of 2019. So I would suspect the short answer would be hopefully the end of March the end of February or first part of March. There may be something to report out.
So then the readings would be the next 3 meetings if we're proposing something?
Normally, I think the first step would be to report it out to the committee of the whole, just to make sure that everybody is in agreement with what we have come up with, and to make sure that all of those details are worked out. I always say the devil is in the details, so all of those little nitty-gritty things, the questions that we had of who does what and on what time frame, that all that would be available. Put that back to the committee of the whole, and then if that's okay with them, to draft the legislation that would come from Mr. Moore's office, make the people aware of it who are going to be affected by this, because that was part of it, was that we would send letters out to those who are currently in the C9 Trust to let them know that there could possibly be a change. And then at each, whenever you're ready to deal with that legislation, to have one reading at each of 3 consecutive meetings so that it does not give the appearance and that we do not rush something through. And it gives people an opportunity to come and address council on that. But that's totally up to council how you want to do that once legislation is drawn up and it's on your agenda. That's totally up to the 7 members of council, how you want to address that and in what time frame. So my hope is that I can do some of the background work, the grunt work, because the mayor and I have been involved in this for year and a half. I kind of backed out of it for a while, so I do have some history with it, but I think that we can get some answers and hopefully get a timeline that makes sense to everybody based on the questions that were raised last year.
Thank you, that was very helpful.
You're very welcome. Mr. Bonsall.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. So I just wanted to announce that there is going to be a Finance Committee scheduled for Monday, January 22nd, at 6 p.m. here in council chambers. We'll be just reviewing the state of the city finances. We'll be making any appropriations changes if they're necessary and doing 2018 committee planning. And in that committee planning, we could potentially discuss the mayor's suggestion about allocating funds from certain developments to a fuel savings account.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you.
So Finance Committee, Monday, January 22nd, 6 o'clock here in council chambers.
Yes.
And I think the notices were sent out to the Sunshine Committee people.
Great.
Any other new business? Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring attention, the past week we've had some very inclement and cold weather, and I'm sure many people here are aware of that we had some of our residents displaced by problems with either their apartments or problems with their heaters and stuff, and I think it made me kind of made me think of what happened during the flood here a couple years ago, and I just think we've got a great community that it seems like when things like this happen, the community just really comes and rallies around these people who are faced with these issues. What I would like to suggest is that we as a council, and maybe our committees, come up with a way to be more involved in these kinds of things as well. And I know that we can't predict when there's going to be inclement weather, or when there's going to be a flood, or when there's accidents going to happen. And that makes it hard to react to these kinds of situations. But I thought if we could maybe work together to put some plans together, simple plans that we could do to help residents who are displaced by this sort of thing, whether it went to housing committee or something. For instance, when we find out something like this has happened, something as simple as opening the community center. Just so there doesn't have to be hours of reaction time and hours of discussion behind the scenes. Just some proactive plans that we can put together so that we can help our citizens as a city while they help themselves. I just wanted to put that out there and encourage us to be proactive and not just reactive when these kinds of things happen.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. And Mayor, maybe you can respond. I know that when I was at the Health Department, it was a requirement that we have some emergency contingency plans for various things, floods, and I'm assuming those are still, Mr. Mayor, can you help us with that?
Yeah.
The departments have those plans?
Yeah, there's a lot of plans in place. But here, on these issues that you're talking about, these were addressed immediately, not the next day or not 3 weeks. There were several things that had to transplant. Number one, we had to relieve the situation. Police, fire department, and building department were responding to those things that night. So then once you address that, then you have to address how long is it going to take to remedy the situation. That's where building department people can come and advise you. And then after that becomes a legal situation. And that's where we're in constant contact. We've had constant conversations with the law department on what exactly has to happen. In one case, we had a lot of positive reaction from the property owner, the landlord, who reacted quick after he had a friendly discussion with one of our building inspectors, and he decided he was going to do the right thing, which is great. Yeah, well, not so much. And so then the discussion is, when we vacate the thing, we have to do something. We can't let them in there. So that's all part of it. It wasn't an instant thing where people were reacting right away, but there has to be a process, legal and everything else. It's a good thought, and anything that we can do to assist you in that, we will do. But it was a complicated situation. We had one individual blame us because the pipes broke. I don't know how. If you know anybody that can forecast 6 months in advance when the pipe's going to break, I think I would appropriate the money. Council would appropriate the money and pay them whatever they want, because nobody knows when they're going to break. So, so there was a number of things. But once again, our departments handled it well. Police, fire, building department, everybody worked together with the legal guidance of the law department. So, with that said, whatever you need, we'll work on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other new business? Mr. Clark?
I just want to throw this out there. Our church has started up doing open gym again for all the youth in the community. It's on the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays of the month at Trinity Pentecostal Church. We're right on Norwood Avenue. Norwood Avenue dead ends into our parking lot. And this is open for kids ages 10 and up. So just come play in our gym, play games and things like that. Parents, if you're looking for a free babysitting night, this would be a great opportunity. So the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays of the month from 5 to 7 p.m.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Any other new business? Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. So I just wanted to, thank Councilmember Thompson for his suggestion. The fire chief and I had a conversation about that this week, and I think that he is, kind of in alignment with Mr. Thompson in the sense that, it would be good to do additional planning for when we can't contact, if we have a 25-unit building like we do on Harris Avenue, and we cannot get a hold of that property owner, what do we do? The Red Cross is not going to come in for a pipe busting. That they come in for disasters, but not for property maintenance issues. But there's been people in the city that have kind of been working to talk about that, and so I just want to encourage Councilmember Thompson that, you're not alone on that thought, and I would definitely encourage you reaching out to the fire chief for that. And then I also had a second thing too.
Does anybody else have any other new business? You're on.
Thank you so much. And I also want to thank the mayor for being here and talking, giving the state of the city address there. Well, one of the items that the mayor mentioned was creating a council of the whole meeting that would be regularly scheduled, where we could have, sounds like the mayor, the safety service director, various members, the chief and assistant chief from the fire department, the police chief and the captain, the building commissioner, potentially Mark Reeves. And I think just his suggestion was a fantastic idea. And so I would like to, make a motion that council schedule a committee of the whole meeting for late January, early February, and just have the first one of these meetings. And I actually well, we can decide later kind of the order, but I think getting it on the books and letting these people know that we would like them to attend would be a very good idea.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Is there any discussion? I guess my discussion is there a date, a day, or a time that is better for everyone? Yes, Mr. Moore?
As a non-member of city council who is sometimes requested to be at council committee meetings, possibly the better course would be to find out from those individuals you want to come to the committee when they're, what dates
That's
work for them as well.
Legitimate. That's very legitimate. Good suggestion. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Bonsall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I'm thinking then maybe we should throw out 2 dates, at least have that we might all be available, to go ahead and get at least some dates, suggested dates out there, and kind of provide those to the members that we'd like. And if we have a couple that can't attend, I mean, that's totally fine. I personally have a feeling that we might like to do this multiple times as we go along. So for me, at least, the entire week, that first full week of February, so from February 5th to February 9th, I'm available any night that week. So I might throw out there that we say February 5th and 7th.
Why don't we do it this way? Who do you want to start with? Let's do it that way. Who do you want to start with? And I will contact that person or persons, and we'll see what works for them. Mr. Sanker.
The street sweeper?
Street sweeper.
If it's running,
Speed limit.
Mr. Clark.
Perhaps the police chief and is it captain or assistant chief?
Do you just want one department, or do you want more than one? Ms. Stevenson.
I think starting with one might be helpful to get into a rhythm of how we'd like to hold the time.
Okay. Everybody agree? All right, so why don't we agree that we'll start with Chief Kramer and Captain Bellman, and I will contact them tomorrow and see what dates they are available, and we'll shoot for that first week in February and go from there. I'll let the clerk know what the clerk, since we don't have a secretary, well, we do, but hopefully we'll have somebody by then. Let them know, and we'll pass around some dates to see what works best for everybody. Mr. Braden, do you have a question?
Yeah, we talking finance committee meeting here?
No, we're talking committee of the whole, at the mayor's suggestion about having regular committee of the whole meetings and talking to department heads, clear up any misunderstanding, get information, just better communication between council and the departments. Okay, so if that's okay, I will contact the chief and we'll get back to you all. Well, I should say, the motion on the floor is to have this meeting either in late January or early February, and that we begin with the police department. Is there any other discussion? Call the roll. No, I'm sorry, Mrs. Hanrahan.
I'm sorry. Did we want anybody here besides the police department, like the mayor, as he said, since that's where there were some issues, and Mr. Gears?
That's why I asked if you wanted more than one person, one person.
If you think I'm going to discuss that lawsuit, I'm not going to.
Well, there isn't a lawsuit anymore.
There is, I'm not suggesting talking about anything.
Ms. Stevenson?
Whatever you want me to do.
I would concur. I would like the mayor to be here as well as Mr. Gears.
All right. So the motion on the floor then is to convene a committee of the whole meeting with the police chief and the captain, and request that the mayor be present as well. And I will take charge of contacting those folks and scheduling that meeting. Is there anything else? Ms. Stevenson?
Yeah, and Mr. Gears.
Okay. All righty. Any other discussion? The motion on the floor is to convene a committee of the whole meeting to begin with the police department and request that the mayor and Mr. Gears be present as well. I will take responsibility in setting the date and notifying council.
motion, Jim?
Call the roll.
Yeah.
Is that your motion?
We will go
Is that
with that
okay?
motion. Yes.
Ms. Stevenson, is that okay for your second? I've expanded your motion. I want to
That
make
is
sure
okay,
that's
thank
okay. All right. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Any other new business? Mr. Sanker?
Madam President, as Mr. Thompson said, that with the inclement weather, we've had some different issues with freezing pipes. There are also freezing pipes underground. As you've probably seen around the city, we've had a number of water main breaks due to the freezing of the pipes underground. You also notice that there's a lot of holes that are still there that are filled with pretty much gravel, and I don't expect those to be filled anytime soon because the asphalt plants this time of year are closed, so we really can't buy bulk asphalt to fill these things at this point in time. So hopefully, as soon as that's a possibility, that'll be taken care of. And the other thing, these things not only happen when it gets the severe cold, but as things start to thaw, these older pipes underground, they tend to spring up again with water main breaks as they start to thaw too. So if you see it happening, if you see water, people, you definitely report it. The sooner we can get to it, the better. But just expect more, sorry to say, before it's all over. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Sanker. Any other new business?
I say we blame the messenger for that.
I'll second.
Any other new business? All right, we will move on to communications. The first is a letter from Keith Moore regarding appointment to the Energy Special Improvement District Board of Directors.
Dear Madam President and members of council, in 2016, council passed a resolution approving the creation and incorporation of an Energy Special Improvement District. One member of the board of directors of that corporation must be a member of Norwood City Council. This position was previously filled by John Mumper. The board of directors is required to meet at least once per year to review the status of energy special improvement projects approved by city council and some administrative tasks. Additional meetings are required to approve for new projects that may be proposed. With this letter, I am requesting that council designate the identity of that member at the January 9, 2017 council meeting. Thank you, Keith Moore, Norwood Law Director.
My apologies for the typo.
Please?
My apologies for the typo.
That's okay. What's your pleasure? I'm retired now, so if no one else wants it, I'd be happy to serve, but anyone else is just dying to do it, please feel free to nominate somebody else. Totally up to you. Mr. Breeden.
I would like to submit that we had, like Donna Lake had this committee.
Seconded by Mrs. Hannerhan. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a letter from Mayor Williams regarding court fines for the month of December 2017.
Dear Madam President and members of council, enclosed, please find the report for Norwood Mayor's Court for the month of December 2017. Should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Thomas F. Williams, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Clark.
Move that the report be received and filed.
Seconded by Mr. Breeden. Is there any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson.
Yes.
Mrs. Hannerhan.
Yes.
Mr. Sanker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden.
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. Next is a letter from Keith Moore regarding the Cornerstone TIF refinancing.
To Norwood City, dear members of council, Tim Gary and I met with bond counsel earlier today about possibly refinancing the bond issued as part of the Cornerstone redevelopment. This is a possibility that has been under consideration for quite some time, and we now have a better idea of how a deal would be constructed between the school district, city, property owner, and investor. I am requesting that council place this matter in committee to discuss whether the city wishes to move forward. I note that the Finance Committee meets January 22nd, although council may prefer to place this in economic development. We should be able to refinance the current bonds at a lower interest rate. The benefits to Norwood of refinancing would be 1, more annual revenue for the Norwood City Schools, 2, roughly $15,000 per year available for the city to spend on infrastructure in and around the development, and 3, at least $300,000, possibly more, for the city's general fund at the end of the bond term in 2032. I also ask that any committee taking up this issue coordinate meeting times with my office and city's bond counsel, who can provide more detailed information than I can. Thank you for your consideration. Sincerely, Keith Moore, Law Director.
It's your pleasure. Mr. Braden,
I vote that the letter be submitted and filed.
do you want to place it into a committee?
The recommendation of Mr. Moore would be to place it into
Economic-
the planning committee.
Economic development?
Yes.
Economic development. So your motion is to receive and file the letter and to place the matter into the Economic Development and Community Engagement
Does
Committee?
that sound appropriate? Yes.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Hanrahan?
Oh,
I'm sorry, you didn't second that?
No.
You had your hand up, I'm sorry. Is there a
I
second to
think
the
Mr.
motion?
Yeah.
Mr. Bonsall, you
Well, I
second
had
it?
more of a question.
Can we have a second before we have a discussion? Second by Ms. Stevenson. Now, is there any discussion? Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Madam President. So I'm fine with this being in Finance Committee or Economic Development. I just kind of wanted to see from our Economic Development Chair if she would like to engage on this.
Ms. Stevenson?
Thank you. I would like to actually ask, do we have any precedents around having a joint committee meeting to at least discuss it before placing it?
That's not a problem as long as you announce it to the public, and you can have the two committee meetings simultaneously if you would like.
I have a
Is that your
follow-up
pleasure?
question.
Yes, Ms. Stevenson?
This is actually for Mr. Moore. If we were to pursue a joint committee meeting, or if either committee were to take on this topic, would your team and would the city's bond counsel be available during the day and evening?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. We would be, and just, there's not as much, when we were originally talking about this, I don't know, almost 2 years ago, we were hoping the deal might be a little better for us, but it's not turned out to be that. So the major benefit of refinancing, having the bonds the way they are now, is the idea if we can refinance it at a lower interest rate, instead of paying the bond owners the difference in the interest rates, we can capture some of that for the schools, a little bit for the city. So, you know, it's a better use one way or the other. The net cost, it shouldn't cost the city anything to do this other than the cost of advertising the ordinances we'll have to pass because of the goofy state laws we have. But it's really just a question of, do we want to move forward on this? And it's just the law department can't make those decisions. So we wanted somebody in council to say, yeah, why don't you move forward on this? And then we'd have ordinances that, and if that's what we want to do, then we'd have ordinances that come forward. So as a practical matter, I don't think it matters which committee, and I don't know what the overlap is, but they're both pretty large. And so that's like council, pretty much, I think, between the two committees. So either one would be fine. I don't think there's, having it in a joint committee would be fine either way. We're just looking for a little guide. Do you want us to go ahead and start doing paperwork on this, really?
Mr. Bonsall? Thank you,
Madam-
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate Councilmember Stevenson's suggestion. I would maybe offer an alternate suggestion here, potentially just placing it in the Economic Development Committee and then just allowing the chair of that committee, if they so choose, I guess, to invite any council member that wants to participate in the discussion to attend that meeting. So I think it might be better just to have it one committee meeting, and I'm on the committee, so I'll attend, but if I weren't, I probably would attend anyways, because I think this is going to be an interesting conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. So the motion on the floor, still to receive and file the letter and to place into the Economic Development, and
I'll second.
Well, it's been seconded.
it's been seconded by Ms. Stevenson. So the motion on the floor is to receive and file the letter and to place it into the Economic Development and Community Engagement Committee. Is there any other discussion? Mr. Braden?
My question is to Mr. Moore. Please. Thank you, Madam President. We talking to, with Mr. Stith with this? Are you working with him, or is he involved in this? Or?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Madam President. Not so much. It's really, is the auditor's role in this is really is when money comes in, property tax money comes in, to designate the part that goes to the school compensation payments and the part that goes to the bondholders. We already have a Cornerstone fund, so it wouldn't even be legislation to set that. We have a Cornerstone TIF fund. So really not. It's the auditor's office is really more a conduit, and I think from their perspective, they wouldn't care one way or the other. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Is there any other discussion? Again, the motion on the floor is to receive and file the letter and to place it into the Economic Development Committee. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. We have no absent members. Mr. Clark.
Move that we adjourn.
Seconded by Mr. Bonzo. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hanrahan?
Yes.
Mr. Sanker?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Breeden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion carries. This meeting is hereby adjourned.